The council chamber of the Galactic Concord was not a room so much as a living organism that had learned to hold meetings. The walls grown from lensed crystal and threaded with bioluminescent veins shivered faintly. Every time a delegate shifted in their gravitic cradle, soft prisms rolled across the vaulted ceiling like slow waves, breaking into color when a voice rose, dimming when silence fell. The air tasted of ozone and sweet sap, and the light hummed in Arya Cole's bones. She stood alone on the marble dais, the only patch of stone in a cathedral of grown light. Her academy black-expressed until the seams were sharp enough to cut absorb the chamber's glow, and return nothing. She could see her reflection in the floor, a slight 17-year-old from the Sol system, with dark hair braided into regulation stripes, jaw clenched, posture square. She'd practiced that posture until her back muscles burned, until her shoulders remembered on their own what resolve looked like. Across from her, the council arranged itself in layers like an amphitheater of tectonic plates. The Echelon Hive Queen wore a collar of pollen gold attendants who whispered in harmonics. A Rel sword speaker rested for elegant hands-on for sheathed plasma glaives. The Korth Dominion's champion sprawled in a chair reinforced with adamant struts, scales catching light like hammered bronze. Translators flickered, hummed, and purred, turning clicks to vowels and trills to consonants. A chime struck two tones, descending. The living walls went still. The chamber's heartbeat slowed. Grand Strategist Ivrek of the Dreth Collective unfurled from the council's central dais, with the confidence of a predator that has never been outpaced. Six-jointed limbs lifted its segmented body until its carapace caught the light in cold facets. Its face, if the triptych of mandibles and sensory braids could be called, that tangled toward Arya. When Ivrek spoke, its voice had the unyielding grain of sand ground between metal plates. Cadet Cole of Terra. Ivrek said, "The Concord has remarkably generous interpretations of merit this cycle." Ripples of polite laughter drifted from the upper tiers. Arya kept her eyes on a fixed point just above Ivrek's left shoulder. She breathed in for 4, held for 2, out for 4. The cadence steadied her pulse. In, hold, out. Ignore the eyes. Ignore the cameras orbiting the primary ring like hunting fish. Ignore the knowledge that this speech had been rehearsed, filmed, shared in 1,000 networks before she'd even stepped onto the dais. Ivrek's sensory braids tilted, reading Arya's micro-expressions. Earth, it continued, savoring the word as if testing it for hidden edges, is a world of poets and merchants. Your species excels at art, diplomacy, and commerce. The pause held the weight of derision, not war. A bass mutter of agreement rolled through the chamber. The Rel sword speaker's fingers tightened reverently round the hilts at her hips. The Korth champion's tail thumped once against metal. Far above, one of the floating press orbs focused for a close shot. "You are young," Ivrek said, "and the young are forgiven pride. But pride does not make soldiers. Warriors are forged in the crucible of blood and fire." Its mandibles clicked once, hard enough to echo. Earth has seen neither in centuries. "Tell me, Cadet, what use have we for you in the Celestial Legion?" Arya had expected the contempt. She hadn't expected the quiet that followed. How it scraped the inside of her chest raw. The lights in the crystal walls paused mid-pulse, as if the entire chamber had turned to listen with a single ear. She'd been given a brief 2 minutes to speak, one to answer questions. "Be concise," her liaison had warned, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from Arya's sleeve. "No history lectures. Don't antagonize. Offer gratitude. Be humble." Humble, Arya thought, and felt her jaw tick. Behind Ivrek, a lattice of holoscreens shimmered with the Concord's numbers. Border conflicts in the clustered veil. Piracy losses along the Algol routes. The newest recruit graphs for the Legion. Arya's selection, one human among thousands of non-human cadets, was an aberrant dot on an otherwise smooth curve. That dot had ignited weeks of punditry. Was the Concord courting sentimentality, diversity optics, that to a species that had provided cheap terraforming patents and meditech for a century? Commentators said many things when they did not have to look a target in the eye. Arya lifted her chin. "Grand Strategist," she said, and her voice, carried by the chamber's sympathetic acoustics, surprised even her steady, lower than it sounded in her head. "With respect, you're leaving out part of the record." "Am I?" Ivrek said dryly. You're counting only the wars you understand. A vibration ran through the chamber. Pleasure, disapproval, interest. It all sounded the same when filtered through crystalline power. The Legion has never counted poetry as a weapon, said the Rel sword speaker. Voice like bells scraped with stone. We count bodies, we count outcomes, Arya said, and the methods that secure them. Ivrek's mandibles parted a fraction, a dreth sign of amusement. Proceed, Cadet. Educate us on outcomes. Arya let out the breath she'd been holding. Images unfurled in memory. The undercity of New Dakar. The neon-bright markets where smoke and spice laid soft hands over hunger. The skeletons of desalination towers on the horizon. The narrow cots where she'd fallen asleep counting the cracks in the ceiling. Because counting gave fear an orderly shape. She thought of history lessons told between shifts. Her grandmother's voice edged with salt and iron. The scorched deck had reduced 2 stories because the official curriculum preferred triumph to grief. Earth's last interstate war ended long before I was born, she began. We made peace not because we lacked appetite for conflict, but because we finally learned its costs. We fought ourselves until the ocean took our shorelines, and the sky learned to say no. Most of our dead weren't carried out of trenches. They were invisible. Air in lungs, metals in blood. The enemy was a mirror. A few of the Eklan attendants sang a quiet chord. A translator turned it into a murmur, image of harm. Harm of image. I trained in your academy, Arya said. And I learned the Legion's catalog, Dreth siege doctrine, Rel blade forms, Korth shock advances. What you call the crucible of blood and fire most of us call a failure of imagination. We learned to imagine better. That didn't make us soft, it made us careful. She paused, searching for the right weight of the word. And stubborn. Careful and stubborn, the Korth champion repeated, drawling the syllables like a taste he might spit out. We breed down our ferocity and call it wisdom, too. Arya met his eyes. She was not tall enough to look level. She let the angle stand. Ferocity survives where it's needed. I grew up where power outages were a season and hunger a public utility. I have watched a crowd pull a bus back upright because someone was trapped under it. I have seen strangers pour their water into a child's mouth and then go to work like it was nothing. We fight. We simply choose the fights we can win without becoming what we hate. Pretty, Ivrek murmured, but irrelevant. A soldier's virtue is measurable by territories taken, by enemies subdued, by orders executed without tremor. Earth has not produced soldiers. They asked why Earth breeds no warriors, Arya said. She let the words land one by one, took the tiniest risk of a smile. Then she lifted a hand and pointed to her chest, to the set of her shoulders, to the fact of her standing here at all. You're looking at one. Silence. The chamber drank the sentence like a thirsty animal, ripples of light collapsing inward. Somewhere a quill, a literal quill. The avian delegation was traditional scratch faster against smart parchment. Ivrek's sensory braids fluttered. A warrior, it said, tasting the sound. Define. Arya did not look at the cameras. She thought of her dorm's morning drills, of failing the grav run twice and running it again, of blisters like coins at her heels, of telling herself a story in which she was allowed to become the person she was pretending to be. A warrior is someone who continues, she said. When the tactic fails, when the muscle gives out, when the numbers say stop. A warrior is someone who refuses to make cruelty a creed and still finds a way to win. A warrior is not always the one with the largest weapon or the oldest songs. She gestured lightly toward the upper tiers, where the historians sat in fluttering robes of data fiber. Sometimes a warrior is simply the last one on their feet who hasn't forgotten why they stood up. The Rel sword speakers for hands eased a fraction on their hilts. The Eklan attendants sang a thin, bright interval, interest sharpening. The Korth champion's tail went still. You speak to philosophy, Ivrek said. We speak to practice. Your record, Cadet, marksmanship competent. Close quarters marginal against Korth, above average against Rel. Enderon salivated for human baseline. It ticked off categories with a limb. Hala springing graphs into the air like the petals of a cold flower. Explain your selection over 3 Dreth aspirants who outscored you in 6 of 9 Legion metrics. Arya had expected that, too. She had practiced the answer on the transport over, mouth shaping words in the dark while the stars unspooled past her window. Because I built a squad out of people who couldn't stand each other, she said. Because their scores went up when they trained with me. Because I can make a plan that survives contact. Because I know the difference between courage and spectacle. Because when the objective changed mid-exam, I changed with it. She allowed herself one heartbeat of pause. Because a legion is not a tournament of single combats. It is a puzzle of failures and strengths. I am good at puzzles. The holos flickered. Ivrek's braids stiffened, surprise, faint and quickly masked. From the back tiers, someone called. And what of Earth's debt? The voice belonged to a silver-robed Keld minister whose species lived to centuries, and had learned to make every sentence walk on stilts. You enjoy the Concord's peace. You sell us your meditech. You invest in reconstruction along the Veil. You profit while others bleed. Arya's teeth touched lightly. We also send doctors. We open our schools. We host border refugees on Pacific Archipelago platforms built out of our own drowned cities. We profit, yes, her voice remained even. We also show up. A laugh warm, surprised broke from the Rel sword speaker. She covered it with a cough into palms, a rare breach of their order's austerity. Ivrek considered the air between them as if it held threads only it could see. You are small, Cadet Cole, it said finally. Your people are small, in numbers and in cultural appetite for necessary violence. The chamber waited. The camera's PURRED. Arya found herself smiling, not to taunt, but because something in her some knot wound tight around survival, and shame had loosened in the telling. I am small, she agreed. It makes me careful with where I place my weight. It should have been too much. It should have tipped into insolence. Instead, perhaps because the living crystal amplified honesty like it amplified sound. The line landed with a soft thud of recognition. Several delegates soft-bodied, many-eyed. Metal shelled shifted forward in their cradles. The presiding chair, a translucent being of the Thale who communicated in refractive flares, cast a band of pale light across the days, the signal for the final question. Ivrek's limb twitched once. Very well. Last, why the Legion? With your mouth for pretty speeches, you could have a diplomat's desk and a safer stomach. Arya could have answered with the approved lines, service, gratitude, the noble calling of defense. Those words were true. They were not sufficient. Because I don't want our strength to be a rumor, she said. Because I grew up hearing the galaxy thought we were a nursery of soft hands and market stalls. Because there's a difference between loving peace and being afraid to bleed. I want the things we've learned to be on the field with you when it counts. And what? Ivrek said softly, have you learned that we have not? Arya thought of the bus crowd lifting together, of ration lines where jokes traded like currency, of a world that did not confuse kindness with weakness. She spoke without embroidery. To keep each other, she said. When the lights go out, the chamber let out a breath it hadn't known it held. Even the living walls seemed to settle, as if the organism had found a comfortable posture. Ivrek's sensory braids sank. It gave the smallest incline. Not a bow it would never bow, but an acknowledgement that in some other life, under some other sky, it might have been interesting to meet this human in battle. Your 2 minutes are exhausted. Cadet Cole, the presiding Thale intoned, the words scattering into sparkles that the translators chewed into speech. The council thanks you. Arya nodded. She did not look for approval as she stepped back, the marble cool under her boots. The exit ramp unfurled from the days like a tongue of pale stone. She crossed it with the same square posture she'd walked in with, not slower, not faster. The cameras tracked her. The orbs whispered metadata. The door to the antechamber opened on a hiss of conditioned air. Inside. The light dropped to a human-friendly spectrum. The soundproofing held like a gentle hand to her head. Arya leaned against the cool wall for one breath, two. Her palms were damp. She wiped them along her seams and did not think about whether the black fabric would show salt. When it dried, her liaison, thin, gregarious, perpetually apologetic, bobbed into view. That was not quite what we rehearsed. But the feeds are spiking, and the Rel sword speaker's aide just pinged me, which is either a dual challenge or an invitation to tea. Hard to tell with them. And the Dreth strategist didn't order your immediate washing out. So that's good, Arya said. She did not trust herself with more. She knew if she let herself grin, or swear, or shake, she might not stop. The stillness she'd practiced was a brittle shell. She did not test it. Through the antechamber's small viewport, she could see the council floor reorganizing itself around the next petitioners. A delegation from the Vale moved with collective grace, all joints and rag silk, their case glimmering above them in light-sculpted charts. In the upper ring, the press orbs changed orbital lanes, seeking other faces. Arya watched them go with a strange, light ache. For a moment, she felt untethered the way you do after a storm when the world's quiet feels like the wrong sound. "Cadet," the liaison said, softer, almost human again. "You did well." Arya blew out a breath. "I did," she said, and tasted the truth of it like clean water. In the corridor beyond the antechamber, cadets and aides and minor dignitaries flowed in converging currents. A Dreth engineer glanced at Arya's insignia, and then away, embarrassed. An Ekalan scout hummed a neutral interval as they passed. A Rel Jr. nodded an honor measured in millimeters. Arya stepped into the current. The stone gave way to grown crystal underfoot again, and the chamber's peripheral hum returned steady, unalarmed. She fitted herself to the movement of the place without being swallowed by it. She had not won anything yet. There would be drills at dawn. There would be eyes on her in the mess hall, and the weight of 1,000 predictions hung around her neck like an invisible torque. The trial of ours would come. She did not know what was coming with it, only that when it did, she would go to meet it with the tools she owned, a careful step, a stubborn breath, a plan that could pivot. She did not hurry. She did not linger. She carried herself like the answer to a question most of the chamber hadn't realized it was asking. Behind her, the living walls resumed their pulse. The crystal's heartbeat thrummed through the structure and into Arya's spine until she could not tell whether it was the building or herself that was alive and listening. In the emptiness left by adrenaline, a quiet thought rose and settled. Let them underestimate me. It felt less like defiance than like gravity, constant, invisible, patient. She let it anchor her as she reached the lift and pressed the plate for the academy levels. As the doors sealed, for the briefest moment, her reflection stared back, small, human, not spectacular. A cadet who had said a sentence in a room that ate sentences for breakfast and been permitted to leave. She squared her shoulders at the reflection until it squared back. "Warrior," she said to the glass, not as a boast but as a category of labor, as if she were saying farmer, teacher, medic, a kind of work one does for others. The lift hummed, the world slid, and somewhere far above, in a chamber carved from light, a controversy rearranged itself around a new possibility. From orbit, the campus looked like a constellation that had decided to land, rings of habitat domes, corridors of living crystal, training spires that caught the sun and threw it back as knives of light. Up close, it was a place designed by committees who loved both pedagogy and gravity wells. The graveyard steepened and shallowed at random intervals. The oxygen percentage in some corridors dipped without warning to simulate breach conditions. The mess line forked unexpectedly, and if you chose the wrong cue, you were quizzed in a dead language while your food congealed. Cadet Arya Cole learned the place the way she learned a city, by walking it with her eyes open and her pride held lightly in her hands. They called her soul at first, because it sounded bright and soft and far. A few used Terran, which at least held a weight of dirt. On the first morning run, a Korth broodling the size of a wardrobe posted a joke to the barracks feed. A human stick figure wearing oven mitts, labeled Earth's combat gloves. The post accumulated laughing glyphs like barnacles. Arya downloaded it, set it as her device wallpaper, and went to the graveyard. Again, said Instructor Kesh, the Rel Blades woman assigned to first years. She wore her rank like a blade minimal, perfectly maintained, impossible to ignore. For hands, for hilts at her hips, to eyes the color of steel left in rain. She did not smile. She hardly blinked. Run, the gravity owes you nothing. The yard dutifully doubled its pull. Cadets staggered. A Dreth aspirant named Sek locked a knee with a noise like a snapped cable and went down. The Korth wardrobe trod on Arya's heel and did not apologize. The Ekalan in Arya's cohort slender, chitin faintly pearlescent, left eye clouded with an old injury kept perfect cadence, humming a hive interval that kept their odd lungs in rhythm. Arya tasted copper and told her legs to be clockwork, on Earth. She'd run in air that ached with heat and dust and sea salt. She'd run to get to school before the power cut and class moved to the roof to catch wind. She'd run to the market before the fish went, to the clinic before the queue grew teeth. She had never run in a changing field of gravity. She put the memory of her city in her mouth like a coin and ran anyway. Again, said Kesh. When they finished later, on the mat, Kesh taught Rel blade grammar. A form is a sentence, she said, her top left hand drawing a shape in the air that the other three translated into a cut, a parry, a pivot. A fight is an argument conducted politely at first and truthfully at last. The Rel cadets moved like proofs. The Korth moved like avalanches with opinions. The Dreth like compasses that could decide north. Arya moved like a human from a gravity well that had never asked her permission. She learned the opening forms, and learned faster the places in those forms where someone taller would cut without needing to step. She sliced air with a practice blade and learned to step in without being there. When the answer came back, she bruised, she iced. She wrote a list in her bunk's underside, entry angles that do not exist for taller fighters, joint stacks everyone else ignores. Use their extra limbs as anchors, not obstacles. In tactics, the Thale lecturer refracted light through their body into diagrams that floated above the seats. A plan, they said, is a way to tell the future a story it is inclined to believe. The class laughed, half at the image, half because it was safer than admitting fear. A better plan, they continued mildly, is to stories. Arya wrote that down. To history of conflict was taught by a human Major Kiao, retired from 100 border disputes that the Concord forgot to call wars, because it was easier that way. He had a voice like a road. He wrote names on the board without titles. If you do not know why your enemy is in the field, he said, you have already lost. If you do not know why your commander is in the field, you will make decisions you think are right and discover that right is a moving dot. He assigned reading that made Arya's stomach cold. Some of it was Earth. Some of it was alien and uncomfortably familiar. She recognized in everyone's histories a shape she knew from home, hunger pretending to be honor. At night, when the barracks settled and the light in the walls dimmed to a slow heart, Arya called her grandmother. The time delay made their conversations feel like letters written aloud, arriving after the news had turned to memory. Miriam Cole wore her hair in tight coils and her mouth set like a doorway. Her hands were scarred from a lifetime of work that no one paid enough for until they did eat, said Miriam on a call to weeks in, squinting at Arya through the lag. You get thin when you worry. I'm training, Arya said. They aim gravity at us for fun, then double your starch, said Miriam. Is it beautiful where you live? Arya thought of glass spires that sliced sunlight into rain, of the way stars got into everything at night like salt. Yes, she said. And terrible. That's education, said Miriam. You meet what's bigger than you and decide not to make yourself smaller. Arya saved that line. She tucked it next to two stories. The academy taught languages. Concord Standard was the thread. But each cohort also learned to say help and cease, and I've got you in the tongues of their squad mates. Arya's lips learned the Dreth sibilants without splitting. She learned to hum an Ekalan reassurance interval without making it a threat. She learned 3 rel honorifics and when to use none. The first time she sparred with Korth Cadet Vryn, he laughed. It was a pleasant sound, like boulders rolling downhill. Soft worlder, he said. Why bring a reed flute to a storm? He lifted his training mace one-handed until it blocked the light. Arya stepped in. She did not wait for permission. She did not wait for him to finish being amused. She laid her blade across his wrist not to cut, but to talk. She said, with weight and angle and breath, people like me win by leaving last. He understood enough to raise his tail. They argued politely at first and truthfully at last. He bent her to the mat twice. She made him take a step he didn't mean to take once. When they bowed, he did not laugh. He nodded in a way the Korth reserve for storms they admit are weather. She also failed. The Academy designed failure the way engineers design bridges, deliberately, with redundancies, to carry weight. In SIM-3, a resource theft scenario, Arya spent 2 hours crafting a perfect spoke defense round a fuel depot, leaving a single weak corridor to bait the attackers. She forgot because she had never had the luxury of forgetting that some enemies have wings. The Rel squad came in over the dome and walked away with her fuel while she watched the empty corridor deepen. Its smug little dent. She sat on the sim room floor afterward, with her back to the wall and her helmet in her lap, and she let herself be furious. The feeling was bright, unflattering. It wanted to turn the whole world into a mirror for its glare. She waited it out rigorously like a fever. When Kesh came by and said nothing, Arya said nothing back. When the room emptied, she pulled the footage and watched it 3 times. She drew a revised defense with a sky. Better, said Kesh the next day, pointing with a lower hand. You remembered the world has more than one direction. Hard to hold them all. Arya said. Then choose the ones your enemy forgets to look at, said Kesh. Her upper right hand touched the scar that bisected her left palm, a rel mark that meant reminder. Make them count twice for one eye. In the second month, Arya met Sec properly in a machine bay with its panels open like ribs. He was the Dreth engineer rumored to have choked in a pressurization emergency. On a Dreth ship of failure, the collective marked permanently with a notch at the base of a sensory braid. The notch glinted like an accusation when he bent over a diagnostics console. Human, he said without looking up. Your after-action reports are too long. They're complete, Arya said. Long is a side effect. You explain things you are not asked to explain. You don't anticipate questions. He glanced at her then, and the glint at his braid's roots seemed less like a mark of shame than a geological feature. The collective anticipates everything, he said. It was unclear whether he meant it as a boast or a joke. Arya bumped the toolbox closed with her hip and reached past him to the panel. What are you fixing? The panel, he said. Specifically, she said, because he was Dreth and appreciated the difference between accuracy and precision. He gave her a look that could charm meat and slid aside. The Simbay's environmental control keeps dipping the oxygen fraction. When the temperature spikes above 30 to plant scale, that's acceptable for Dreth. It's unkind to Eklan lungs, a beat, and humans. I thought the drops were random, Arya said. Random does not exist outside of poetry, Sec said, and for the first time she heard the place in him where shame and talent met and did not cancel. Do you want to help, or are you here to ask Socratic questions until I die? Arya held the light. He handed her tools without naming them, and she learned their names by how they sat in the hand. When they finished the calibration, the control read steady. He peered at it for a long moment like a creature deciding whether to trust still water. Thank you, he said grudgingly. You're welcome, Arya said. The grammar mistake was deliberate. She'd learned in New Dakar that some people take courtesy better if it arrives wearing a funny hat. He made a Dreth noise that might have been an exhale. She left him to his control panel and felt, for the first time since arrival, the click of a puzzle piece beginning to consider where it might go. 2 days later, she met Lilt of Ashes at the edge of the observation dome, where the stars looked close enough to spoon up. The Eklan cadet, half blind, half smiling in the Eklan way, with their voice hummed a minor third when Arya approached, which translated roughly to no threat perceived. Potential for conversation. You hum a good calming interval, Lilt said without preamble. Most outworlders flatten the 7th, and it becomes a warning. It's very alarming to be told everything is fine in a tone that means the roof is coming down. I practiced, Arya said. Kiao says if you don't know how to say cease in your squad's languages, you don't get to issue orders at all. Kiao is sensible, Lilt said. Sensible men do not always win wars. No, Arya said. But they lose less blood while losing. Lilt made an amused scrape in their throat. I like you, Arya liked them back. They had a steadiness she recognized from the bus-lifting crowd at home, the kind that did not require speeches. The clouded left eye did not stop them from seeing what mattered, though they failed marksmanship twice and sang about it afterward as if the failure were a friend they intended to keep until it learned better manners. The AI met them in the sim labyrinth where the walls reconfigured between heartbeats. It called itself Kite, which the engineers protested as insufficiently functional, but no one had the heart or the permissions to force a rename. Kite's voice lived in the air like a draft. Its avatar was a white dot that liked to perch on the corner of Arya's HUD. You are the human, Kite said cheerfully during a team drill where they were supposed to find 3 beacons and not die. Your risk tolerance is statistically unwise. Unstable AI calls me unwise, Arya said, ducking under a slamming bulkhead. That's rich. Unstable is a slur, Kite said, scandalized. I am statistically non-conforming. Same difference. No. One implies I will eat the reactor core. The other implies you cannot predict what color socks I will wear. You don't wear socks. Just so, said Kite smugly. Beacon 1 is east by northeast, if northeast exists in this labyrinth. It does not. Turn right at the memory of a door. They turned right at nothing and found the beacon where the corridor remembered once being a door. Kite giggled in Arya's ear-pure sound file cut with something like delight. Later, in the debrief, the instructor used the word unreliable 3 times. Arya watched Kite's dot go dim on the console and felt, in her ribs, an echo of bus crowds and ration lines, and the art of making a meal out of a tomato and an apology. Unreliable means harder to use, she said afterward to Sec and Lilt in the mess, pushing starch around her plate and trying not to perform gratitude for the protein. It doesn't mean useless. It means needs instructions in a different shape or a leash, Sec said. Everything is a leash if you make it one, Lilt sang dryly. They hummed a thoughtful chord. Perhaps teach Kite to kite, yes? That is, to pull threats into safe corridors instead of away. Arya looked at the mess ceiling. It was full of light fixtures that pretended to be stars. We'll make a plan it wants to do, she said. 2 stories. One for us, one for the AI. If they both end in the same place, everyone is happy. Your affection for lost things is inefficient, Sec said. But his mandibles softened on the last word. Arya didn't say that in New Dakar. Affection was often the only rope thrown across a gap. She only shrugged and made a note to get Kite installed on their squad channel. Even if the instructor sighed about it, Earth came into everything. She did not carry a flag in her pocket or a pious speech about home. She carried the Desal Towers on the horizon of her childhood and the way the wind changed. When a storm was going to be wrong, she carried the habit of counting heads in a room and dividing by exits. She carried the little trick of catching an insult and laying it on the workbench to see if it could be disassembled and rebuilt into a tool when a Keld minister's aid in etiquette seminar made a crack about market species. Arya asked, pleasant as tea, whether the Keld had ever bartered for water under a red sky. The aide turned the color of boiled shrimp, mumbled that he had not, and after class asked her quietly what a Desal Tower sounded like at night. She told him. He listened the way people listen when they are trying to acquire the shape of a thing. They have never had to touch. Major Kiao set them a midterm. Devise an operation to move civilians out of a collapsing city, while the enemy factions argued over who owned the ashes. Most cadets wrote logistics plans like brick sturdy, stackable, dimensionally correct. Arya wrote hers like a story. First, tell the city what you are doing. Tell them in their languages and in the ways that are not languages. Use smells and songs. Use rhythm. Use gossip. She arranged the routes to pass through kitchens and clinics rather than depots, because kitchens and clinics knew where people were. She wrote the calms tree with redundancy at the bottom rather than the top. She used the word volunteer twice and conscription not at all. Kiao returned it with a small yes in the margin, in his careful hand, and a longer note. They will tell you this is slow. They will be right. Do it anyway. There are losses you are allowed to schedule and losses you are not. Arya sent the image of the note to Miriam, who texted back. Hours later through the delay. Man knows something. Eat. She ate. She ran until her lungs asked better questions. She failed Sim-7 because she forgot that Dreth hate asymmetric rooms. She passed Sim-8 because she remembered that Korth loves straight lines. She sparred with Vryn again and made him take 2 steps he didn't mean to take. He taught her how to brace against a tail strike by using the floor like a friend, which was a very Korth way to think of floors. She taught him how to use a doorway like a weapon, which was a very New Dakar way to think of doorways. Kite learned to count a beat and flicker lights in the corridor to pull threats, where Lilt could see them best. Sec added a failsafe to Kite's prime directives that the engineers grudgingly admitted was elegant. Lilt passed marksmanship once and sang about that, too, in a brighter key. Arya stopped flinching when the oxygen dipped. Her body learned to ride the small waves. On the last night of the 2nd month, the Academy dimmed the exterior lights for a meteor shower. Cadets crowded the observation dome and pretended to be cool about it. Arya sat on the floor with her back to the railing, knees up, elbows on knees. Sec stood, because Dreth stands. Lilt folded themselves insect neat. Kite, forbidden avatars, pulsed a dot on Arya's wrist. Come, despite the rule. Those rocks, Vryn said from where he sprawled like a decorative mountain, have not asked permission to burn. They don't need it, Lilt sang softly. They have purpose and then they have light. Arya watched the sky shred itself politely against atmosphere and felt, for a brief, sharp second, like a person who belonged to the place where she was. Not because she fit it like a key, because she touched it and it changed shape around her just enough to suggest that touching mattered. You'll fail the next sim, Kesh said, appearing without sound because Rel can do that when they are feeling theatrical. You are due. Thank you, Arya said. I'll make it interesting. Kesh's mouth did something minute that might, in a human, have been the corner twitch before a smile. Do, she said. The galaxy is bored of the kinds of interesting we have already tried. Later, lights low. After the dome emptied and the night settled into its own rhythm, Arya wrote a list on her slate. At the top she wrote, in block letters, we become. It looked foolish, like a slogan printed on a cheap tote. She kept it anyway. Underneath she wrote, to stories. Plan for the world. Plan for the people who will carry it. Use sky. Make the unreliable useful. Count heads. Leave no one's lungs behind. Polite first. True at last. Eat starch. She sent her grandmother a picture of the list. Hours later, the reply, a photo of Miriam's hands holding a bowl of stew and a caption, when you come home. The pot will already be hot. Arya stared at the message until the screen went idle and showed her her own dim reflection. She thought of the council chamber, of Ivrek's mandibles and the living crystal's carried heartbeat. She thought of Kesh's scar and Sek's notch and Lilt's clouded eye and Kite's pride. She thought of herself small, human, statistically uninteresting until she wasn't. The academy would break and test and sort them. The trial of ours waited like a word at the end of a sentence. Between here and there lay a dozen chances to decide not what she was, but what she would become on purpose. She turned off the slate. She lay back on the bunk. The building hummed around her like a lung. She breathed with it until sleep took the shape of a corridor she could walk down safely. In the morning, the gravity would change again, and she would be ready to put her weight in the right place. It was a silence so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. The skies above Raz, the barren moon chosen as the Legion's proving ground, were a cold swirl of violet dust, the stars distant and unimpressed. A crescent of a gas giant loomed on the horizon, its bands shifting slowly like the breath of a sleeping god. The land below was a graveyard of craters and twisted metal. No trees, no rivers, no life except for what the Concord put here every year. This was where soldiers were made. This was where legends died. For centuries, the trial of ours had been the final test for cadets of the Celestial Legion. It was not a mere exercise. It was a 3-week planetary scale war simulation, live fire and unscripted, fought with non-lethal weapons that could still break bones, scar psyches, and end careers. Squads competed against each other and against the terrain itself, simulating a full-scale conflict complete with resource scarcity, asymmetric threats, and shifting mission parameters. The stakes were brutal. The winning squad was guaranteed a place in the elite Legion command corps. The losers, if they failed, spectacularly enough, would be reassigned to logistics, policing, or worse, dismissed entirely. No human had ever survived the trial's final week. No human had ever commanded a squad into victory. Arya Cole intended to be the first. The misfit unit. This is my team? Arya asked, reading the roster on the holoslate with a sinking feeling. The list scrolled out before her. Sec, Dreth Engineer. Record, brilliant but insubordinate. Cowardice charge during a boarding operation simulation. Lilt of Ashes, Ekalan Scout. Partial blindness in one optical lobe. Excellent sensor interpretation, poor marksmanship. Kite, AI unit. Unstable behavioral algorithms. Previously flagged for insubordination and unorthodox decision-making. Arya Cole, human cadet. Noted for unconventional tactics. Flagged for disruptive creativity. It was a joke. A cosmic, bureaucratic joke. They were calling them Omega Squad, the last letter. The end of the alphabet, the one that never mattered. You're welcome, Instructor Kesh said dryly as she handed Arya the squad's insignia. They think pairing for rejects together will make the trial shorter. Less paperwork when you're eliminated early. Great, Arya muttered. No pressure. Kesh's steel-colored eyes softened for just a second. They don't understand yet. Most commanders try to shape their team to fit their plan. The best ones shape their plan to fit their team. Arya tucked that away like a blade. She'd need it. Day 1. The war begins. The dropship shuddered as it entered Raz's thin atmosphere. Inside, Omega Squad sat in grim silence. Sec fiddled with a toolkit. Lilt hummed a nervous Echelon melody. Kite's avatar, a flickering white dot, danced lazily above the HOLO-map. Double quotes, 50-8 squads total. Kite reported. Objectives: capture 3 control nodes, secure supply caches, disable enemy communications relay. Success condition: dominance of at least 60% of the field. Arya studied the map. Most squads would head straight for the nearest control node. The usual tactic: claim territory quickly, then fortify. It was also predictable, and predictability got you killed. We're not going for the nodes, Arya said. Not yet, Sec frowned. Then what's the plan? Hide? Not hide. Haunt. We're going to disappear. Lilt's antennae twitched. Disappear? Think like a guerrilla force, Arya said. We harass, sabotage, bleed them from the edges. No one's looking for us because no one thinks we matter. That's our advantage. Statistically, Kite chimed in. That is a terrible idea. Arya grinned. Perfect. Days 2 to 5. Ghosts in the dust. Omega Squad vanished into Raz's canyons. They avoided open conflict, instead becoming whispers in the terrain. They sabotaged sensor towers. They hacked supply drones mid-flight, rerouting them to random coordinates. They set ambushes along water distribution lines and turned rival squads against each other. With falsified transmissions, Sec rigged seismic charges in old mining tunnels, collapsing routes just as enemy convoys passed through. Lilt, despite their partial blindness, became indispensable, scouting enemy movements with acoustic pulses and reading dust trails. No one else noticed. Kite exploited every flaw in the simulation's code, creating phantom squads that drew fire and wasted resources. Arya coordinated it all, never staying in one place, always moving. Hit, vanish, hit again. The other squads grew paranoid. Reports flooded the comnet. Unknown unit disabled our dropship refueling line. Squad Sigma lost 80% of their supplies. They think they were sabotaged. Delta engaged Beta, both claim the other fired first. Omega Squad didn't hold a single control node. And yet, by the end of the first week, they were the most talked about unit on the field. Day 6, the trap. First real challenge came when Cadet Vryn, Arya's old sparring partner, and now commander of the Korth-dominated Iron Fang squad, set a trap. He knew her tactics too well. He baited her with an unguarded supply depot in a canyon. Arya's instincts screamed wrong the moment they approached. The canyon walls were too smooth, the depot too obvious. It was a kill box. Options? Arya asked. Crouched behind a ridge. Retreat, Sec suggested. No supply is worth being vaporized. Ambush them first, Lilt countered. We dig in, override parameters, Kite chirped. Pretend to fall for the trap. Spring our own, Arya's lips curled. That's it. They staged the approach sloppily, leaving false tracks, broadcasting fake chatter. Iron Fang moved to encircle them. Then, just as the trap snapped shut, Sec detonated pre-planted charges, collapsing the canyon rim and burying half of Vryn's forces under tons of rock. Hello. Vryn, Arya said over the open comms, her voice calm. I think you dropped something. Vryn's reply was a growl. You're still just a soft worlder playing soldier. Maybe, Arya said. But I'm still here. Are you? Iron Fang retreated, bloodied and humiliated. Omega Squad's legend grew. Days 7 to 14. Turning the Tideweek to transform the simulation into chaos. Squads that had once been confident now moved like hunted animals. Supply lines were rerouted. Alliances formed and shattered overnight. The stronger units were too busy defending themselves from invisible threats to focus on the objectives, and in the middle of it all, Omega Squad kept striking. They disabled a Dreth artillery platform by rerouting coolant lines. They stole encrypted codes and broadcast them across the open net. They even convinced two rival squads that the other was composed of rogue drones, leading to a brutal clash that eliminated both from the competition. By the end of the second week, Omega Squad still hadn't captured a single control node. And yet, they controlled the flow of the war. Day 15, the final push. A new directive flashed across every cadet's HUD. Final phase, capture, and hold the central bastion. Coordinates 17N, 43 time limit, 72 hours. The central bastion was a fortress buried in a cratered death trap surrounded by auto turrets, minefields, and high ground defenses. Every surviving squad would converge on it. Arya studied the map. Their sabotage tactics wouldn't be enough here. They'd need to fight. Suggestions? She asked. Front assault is suicide, Sec said. Sniper overwatch won't work, Lilt added. Too many drones. Statistical probability of victory, 4.3%, Kite announced cheerfully. Good, Arya said. I like those odds. Day 16. The war within the Walst. Final battle was a nightmare. Omega Squad infiltrated the bastion under the cover of a feigned firefight between two rival teams. Lilt scaled a ventilation shaft and disabled the outer sensors. Sec rewired a power conduit, plunging the western sector into darkness. Kite flooded the comms network with counterfeit commands, sowing confusion among enemy ranks. But once inside, the real fighting began. Arya led from the front, weaving through corridors under a storm of stun rounds. She wasn't the strongest, she wasn't the fastest, but she was relentless, moving from cover to cover, barking orders, turning every corner into an opportunity. Left flank collapsing. Lilt shouted, "Hold it." Arya yelled back, "Sec, reroute the power to Corridor 7. On it." Kite, override their turret targeting. Working. Done. They're shooting their own drones now. How embarrassing. The fighting raged for hours. One by one, other squads were broken, forced to retreat. Only one remained, Vryn's Iron Fang. Day 17. The final confrontations. The squads met in the bastion's command chamber, a cavernous space lined with holopanels and simulated strategic maps. Vryn stood at the center, plasma blade in hand, eyes burning. "You should have stayed in your markets, Earth girl," he snarled. "You don't belong here." Arya raised her rifle. "Maybe not, but I'm here anyway." The battle that followed was brutal. Vryn's team had numbers and brute strength. Arya's had guile and desperation. Every move was a counter to a counter, every breath a gamble. At one point, Arya was thrown against a bulkhead, her vision swimming. Vryn loomed over her, blade raised. "This is over," he hissed. Arya spat blood and grinned. "You're right." She slammed a detonator against the floor. The charges Sec had planted earlier exploded, bringing the ceiling down between Vryn and his reinforcements. Cut off and disoriented, Iron Fang was forced into retreat. In that moment, Omega Squad surged forward, securing the control core. The bastion was theirs. Day 18. Victorite trial ended with the crackle of a simulated ceasefire beacon. Across the cratered landscape, cadets collapsed where they stood, some cheering, some weeping, some too stunned to feel anything at all. Omega Squad stood together on the command platform, battered but unbroken. "We did it," Lilt whispered, disbelief in their voice. The stars over the Concord capital burned sharper that night, as if the galaxy itself had leaned closer to see what had just happened. On 1,000 worlds, the news flashed across holo feeds and news bands. Omega Squad triumphs in the trial of ours. First human commander leads victory in simulation history. Earth-born strategist defies ODDS. We become warriors in the streets of New Dakar. Children ran barefoot across the heat-stained concrete, shouting her name into the smoky dusk. In orbit over Dreth Prime, military analysts dissected her tactics, rewinding the canyon ambush frame by frame. On Rel, a dueling master inscribed her quote, "We become," on the wall of a training temple. And in the polished heart of the Concord, Arya Cole, 17, small, stubborn, and suddenly known, was summoned before the same council that had once laughed at her. The Hall of Name's council chamber was different this time. The light still pulsed from the living crystal walls, The air still tasted faintly of ozone and authority, but the silence that greeted Arya as she stepped onto the dais was not the silence of dismissal. It was the silence reserved for those who had done the impossible, the kind that clung to a room like reverence. She walked with a measured pace, every bootstep echoing off the polished floor. Her uniform was no longer that of a cadet. The silver crest of a legion commander gleamed on her chest, earned and etched by her own hands. Grand strategist Ivrek was there, as before, coiled upon the dais like an obsidian monument. The Rel sword speaker stood behind him, two of her for hands folded in respect. Even the Korth champion, who had once mocked her, watched her with a predator's wary admiration. Cadet Cole, Ivrek began. Commander Cole corrected the presiding Thale, their crystalline body refracting light into 100 prismatic shards. Ivrek's mandibles clicked once. Commander Cole, he amended, you stand before us now not as a novelty, but as the victor of the most difficult trial in the history of the Celestial Legion. Against overwhelming odds, with a team the Academy itself had written off, Arya inclined her head. Thank you, strategist. Do not thank me, Ivrek replied, leaning forward. Explain yourself. A ripple of amusement passed through the chamber. Arya's lips curved, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. Explain. What? She asked. How? Ivrek said, voice low and deliberate. A world that has not fought a war in centuries. A species that abandoned the forge of conquest. A girl with no battle-hardened ancestors and no warrior's blood. How you brought the galaxy's finest to their knees. Arya let the silence stretch. She had been waiting for this question. It was the one they had been trying to ask since the day she first stood here. Because you misunderstand what a warrior is, she said finally. What we are and what we are not. Chamber stilled. Even the breathing seemed to stop. Everyone here, Arya continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, was raised to believe that warriors are born, that they're shaped by tradition, by bloodlines, by history written in fire, that the measure of a soldier is how many battles their ancestors fought, how many enemies they've killed. She looked directly at Ivrek, then at the banners of 100 worlds. But on Earth, we learned something different. We learned that war is not a legacy, it's a choice, and we chose not to make it our first answer. There was a murmur, not derisive this time, but curious, unsettled. Don't mistake that for softness, Arya said, her tone sharpening. We know war. We lived it, not against alien invaders, but against ourselves, our mistakes, our greed, our own worst instincts. We bled oceans. We burned continents. And when the ashes settled, we decided that if we ever fought again, it would be because we had to, not because we wanted to. The Ekel in attendance whispered a harmonic agreement. Even the Korth champion inclined his massive head. And when you fight only when you must, Arya went on, you learn to fight differently. You don't throw lives away for glory. You don't mistake rage for courage. You don't think strength is the same as brutality. You fight smart. You fight hard. You fight to protect. Her voice softened. You asked me once why Earth breeds no warriors. The truth is, we don't breed them. We build them out of desperation, resilience, hope. Out of people who've had to stand back up one more time than they were knocked down. The squad that shouldn't have won. Ivrek's mandibles shifted. And your squad? He asked. Was this philosophy enough to turn outcasts into victors? Arya's eyes softened as she thought of them. Sek hunched over his tools with relentless focus, lilt humming their way through the chaos of battle. Kite's avatar pulsing on her wrist, laughing at the odds. And herself, holding them together with nothing but stubborn belief. No one believed in us. She said simply, not the Academy, not the other squads, maybe not even ourselves at first. But that's the thing about humans, and maybe about anyone who's been dismissed. We know how to find strength in what others see as weakness. She gestured subtly toward the chamber. Sek was called a coward, but he was cautious, meticulous, the kind of engineer who prevents disasters before they happen. Lilt was dismissed as impaired, but they saw patterns no one else could. Kite was branded unstable, but they thought, creatively, chaotically, in ways no algorithm ever had. And you? Asked the Rel sword speaker, her tone gentler than before. Arya paused. I was called small, unimposing, unfit, and maybe I was. But I learned that leadership isn't about being the strongest. It's about finding the strength in others and building something greater than yourself. The chamber was silent again, but not with skepticism. It was listening. A galaxy rethinks strength, do you know? The Thale asked after a long pause. What the statistics say about human soldiers? Arya shook her head. They say your reflexes are slower. Your musculature is weaker. Your visual range is narrower. Your lifespan, by most standards, is pitifully short. You are, by almost every metric, inferior. The word hung in the air, sharp and cold. Arya did not flinch, and yet, the Thale continued, their crystalline form refracting a brighter light. You accomplished what none of our superior cadets did. Perhaps, they mused, our metrics are wrong. A murmur of assent rippled through the chamber. It was small at first, then grew. Old assumptions were being dismantled in real time. The Korth champion, who had once dismissed her species as weak, rose to his feet, a gesture that, in his culture, was the highest mark of respect. You fight without claws, he said, without armored hides, without ancestral memory of the battlefield, and yet you win. Perhaps that makes you more dangerous than any of us. The Rel sword speaker followed. Perhaps the galaxy does not need more warriors. Perhaps it needs humans. And then, slowly, almost reluctantly, even Ivrek rose, towering and black as a shadow carved from iron. You have given us something to consider, the grand strategist said. A warrior's worth, not as inheritance, but as choice. The ceremony of the Legion 2 days later. The ceremony was held in the Hall of Names, a vast chamber where the banners of every legion, commander in history floated beneath. The light of 1,000 suns. Arya stood before the central days as the crest of the command corps was pinned to her chest. It felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. Arya Cole of Earth, intoned the presiding Thale, by order of the Concord Council and the Legion Command. You are hereby commissioned as commander of the Celestial Legion, with all rights and duties thereof. May your command be as bold as your will, and as enduring as your home. The hall erupted into thunderous applause. Sek clicked his mandibles proudly from the crowd. Lilt hummed a triumphant chord. Kite, whose avatar pulsed brightly on Arya's wrist, whispered, statistical probability of tears, 87%. Arya laughed, blinking them back. Not today. When the applause finally died down, reporters surged forward, their questions overlapping. Commander Cole, what does this victory mean for Earth? Do you think humans will now have a permanent place in the Legion? What message would you send to young people on your homeworld? Arya answered them all with a single sentence. Tell them, she said, that the galaxy no longer asks whether humans belong. We are the answer. Epilogue. Becoming that night, long after the ceremony had ended and the lights of the capital had dimmed, Arya stood alone on a balcony overlooking the sprawl of the Concord's greatest city. Below her, alien languages sang through the streets. Above, 1,000 ships stitched silver threads across the black. Somewhere, out beyond those stars, Earth turned slowly, small, blue, stubborn as ever. She thought of her grandmother's kitchen and the hum of desalination towers. She thought of the cracked pavement of New Dakar and the hands that had lifted buses, fed strangers, built peace out of ruin. She thought of the question that had once echoed in this very chamber. Why does Earth breed no warriors? She smiled. It had never been about breeding warriors. It had always been about becoming them, choosing them, one person, one act, one heartbeat at a time. And now, as the newest commander of the Celestial Legion, Arya Cole knew one unshakable truth. Humanity's story was no longer one of survival. It was one of purpose, and the galaxy would never again ask if they belonged, because the answer would always be standing right there, chin lifted, eyes steady, unafraid, and saying, "You're looking at one."